All right, so I know I hadn't put out a whole lot of videos lately. About 2/3 of the video footage that I shoot isn't really usable, and then of the third that's left, about half of it I go to edit, and I just get frustrated trying to edit it. I am not a video editor. You probably know this watching my videos, but video editing is a little difficult for me, and it's just tedious. I don't like it. And so there's a lot of stuff I could probably post and I just never get around to it. I've got a video from last year where I rebuilt the rear end of my Mustang and I still haven't posted it yet because it's about 5 hours of video I got to work through. But today I want to talk to you about leadership and the current lack of leadership in our work environments. I've had a few discussions lately that had a common thread of leadership examples my friends and I have seen or performed over the years, and the perception of failures of Millennials and Gen Z. I told my kids as they move into their work environments that you learn the most from the worst jobs, but only if you've had good examples to compare them to. I've worked for some of the best and worst employers. And I've had leadership experience and training. I spent many years on the lower rungs of seniority in a handful of shops, and then I later transitioned into leadership positions, supervising and training new mechanics. The Air Force sent me to Non-Commissioned Officer Academy and Senior Non-Commissioned Officer Academy, where we were immersed in leadership training so we could be effective leaders, and so that we could also communicate to higher leadership issues we were having. If you're in a leadership position, you have to be honest and assess yourself. Are you a boss or are you a leader? Many people believe the words are interchangeable, but a leader recognizes the differences. The word boss infers a dominating presence in the workplace. Being bossy is not a likable trait, while leadership is a valued trait. A boss has to tell people what to do, and employees do what they are told if they want a paycheck. A boss might be able to yell and scream and cajole workers, but workers who are abused or disrespected often turn out subpar work. A leader gets people to invest in the vision of the organization. A leader sets individual tasks and goals. He lets workers know what he expects and why it's important to the organization. He holds them accountable when they fail, but also considers whether it was a failure of the individual or a failure of the organization. A leader gives their workers cover when the organization acts unfairly. A boss has goals, and he demands that the goals are met no matter the effort required or the obstacles in the way. A leader has goals, and he ensures his workers have the tools and training to meet the goals. He strives to remove obstacles so his employees can achieve more. Typically, a boss is someone who is tossed into a leadership job and expected to sink or swim without being taught leadership skills. Sometimes they had the training, but they weren't able to internalize those lessons, either due to an inability to understand them or due to arrogance. An arrogant boss is most dangerous because they will refuse to take responsibility for their failures. A leader is someone who has had effective leadership training and understood the importance of the lessons. While some people might be claimed to have leadership talent, I believe real leaders have mentors, formal or informal, who taught them to lead. It's not a skill that comes naturally, and the subject has a depth of knowledge that an individual can't divine on their own. The Air Force put me through a lot of leadership training, and for a very good reason. In NCO Academy, one of the first lessons was on motivation and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you want to motivate your people, you need to understand them. Your workers shouldn't feel like their safety is in danger unless they're a first responder or in the military. And even then, you have to engage in levels of risk management. After safety needs, your worker needs to make enough money to provide food, shelter, and transportation for their families. Otherwise, what reason do they have to work for you? Next, they need to feel like they're a part of the team. The most stressful environments I've been in were work environments where everyone was pitted against one another. This is a leadership failure. And unfortunately, most employers don't even aim this high. Above this, you want employees to feel that their work is valued, and at the highest levels, you want employees to feel that you want them to take on the mission of your organization for themselves. If your shop foreman leaves for a week or has an emergency and he's out for a week, can you trust that the workers know and believe in their job enough to perform the work without supervision? Too many employers try to use the threat of firing as their only tool of motivation. It's pure laziness and a lack of leadership. If you want to motivate employees, you need the carrot and the stick, but mostly the carrot. First and foremost, payers do need to be paid in full on time. The quickest way to lose good people is to screw up their pay. Sure, they might love the work environment, but if you can't be relied on to ensure they have a paycheck for their work, they'll leave. There's no reason for working if it doesn't pay, period. One of my uncles worked for a major retail chain for a short while. His first 3 months, every paycheck was incomplete or late. He did not hesitate to leave. And when he did, the manager was upset and asked why he'd given up. He answered that they obviously didn't care enough to keep him if they couldn't get his pay right. Your employees have a responsibility to their families to never work for free. When it comes to pay, a worker who works 40 hours a week and still can't afford living expenses will not be a motivated employee. Threatening a worker with firing doesn't work if the pay doesn't pay the bills in the first place. Johnny Paycheck had a very popular country song back in the day based on this. A minimum wage worker has no problem saying, "Take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more." You'll rarely hear that sentiment from a worker who's well paid. The bullshit level has to get really high for a well-paid worker to leave. But don't make the mistake of thinking that pay is the only way you can motivate your employees. Fostering a happy, cooperative culture is free. It just takes work on the part of management. A friend of mine spent a year or two managing a well-known chain of transmission rebuild shops a state away. He wasn't exceptionally knowledgeable about transmissions. He was hired because they were failing, and he had a solid reputation in management. The techs were all burnt out and frustrated. His hands were tied financially, and he was only allowed X amount of dollars for salaries. He was living in a temporary apartment and driving home on the weekends, and he had nothing to do on weeknights. He started baking, and on Fridays, he'd take cake to each of his shops. The tech's attitudes turned around, and they started living for Friday cake. It cost him some of his personal time, but their work improvement made him look like a miracle worker. It was a stupid, simple change, and it did require effort on his part, but it's all about caring for your fellow man, even if he's your employee or subordinate, and not treating him as a disposable asset. When I led an aircraft maintenance scheduling office, I had a stupid, simple way of diffusing tensions. We had a large whiteboard in the office, and we used it for training. We would write Excel formulas on there and stuff. But if something was stressing you out, you cartooned it on the big board. We had 2 rules. First, no stick figures. You had to draw actual bodies on the people and make them look, at least cartoonishly real. And the second rule was only draw what your career can handle, which is a nice way of saying nothing lewd or offensive enough to get you fired. When given an opportunity to make a joke out of what was stressing them, my coworkers went full bore. They got so good that our commanders would visit our office to see what was stressing us that week and to get a good laugh at it. It was a free benefit that didn't even cost me time. Now, it might sound like I'm a contrarian when it comes to higher leadership, but that's not the case. Middle leadership must always present upper leadership positively to the employees. If you can't, you need to find another job. Whatever you do, don't trash talk. Word gets around, and you don't want your boss hearing that you're trashing him. In the military, it's granted that the one unalienable right of airmen is their right to complain. My airmen always found something to grouse about, and as a leader, you can't join in on disparaging higher leadership. As an equipment technician, I was a mushroom. I was kept in the dark and fed lots of bullshit. But when I transitioned, it was hard to see why leadership was making decisions that often made more work for us. But when I transitioned into being a scheduler, I was suddenly in the eye of the tornado every day. I could see the conflicts that were influencing our leadership's decisions. I often found myself in the middle of conversations where airmen were complaining. And when I had the ability to share information, I did so. I wanted the airmen to understand that there was a decision-making process that sometimes screwed them, but it was for a purpose. When I was able to tactfully elevate the workers' concerns to our commanders, I did so. But I always did so as a suggestion, because they often had information that I was lacking. More importantly, I tried to find ways to give back to those airmen who had to sacrifice for the mission. If they get screwed, but they see you're trying to level the playing field and help them out, they'll work hard for you. Never disparage your upper leadership. Back their decisions. If they're asking you to act unethically, speak out to them, and if necessary, leave. Cover your ass. Keep notes, keep emails, keep your communication with whomever has oversight. Still refrain from talking trash. Trash talk diminishes your credibility, and if there are legal problems, you want as much credibility as you can get. One way you can tell bosses from leaders is that bosses tend to look at productivity as a motivation problem, while leaders look for constraints to productivity. I've had bosses who refused to look at issues and instead insisted that we make magic happen. Several years ago, my wife worked at a drafting office, drafting property from aerial photography surveys and legal descriptions. She was the project manager, managing her fellow drafters and trying to ensure that the product went out the door in a timely manner. They were absolutely swamped with work. Then the owners sold the company to a major corporation for a price in the high 8 figures. The new company sent in some business school bosses who lived up to the claim, C's get degrees. They saw a room with 6 full-time drafters as an expense and immediately fired 2 of them. Suddenly, my wife's ability to get work out the door dropped. Profits fell. So the idiots in charge fired another person. My wife was suddenly working 80 hours a week and hating her job. Then they promoted her to management, which meant that she no longer qualified for overtime pay. And her paychecks dropped. She quit, and she kept in touch with her friends there. And the bosses continued to fire until they got down to a single drafter and a manager. At which point the corporation decided that the product was just unworkable. Nobody can make this work, and they closed up shop. Meanwhile, the original owner had his non-compete clause expired, and he reopened shop, hired back all the people who'd been fired, and within a few months, he had his company up and running at their original speed again. Knowing that he was running the show again, his old clients came back, and he was basically printing money. A leader asks, do my employees have the tools to perform the job? And do my employees have the training to perform the job? Motivation is a factor in production, but it's not the only factor. Leaders consider the theory of constraints. What is keeping me from producing? If I have 100 employees making hammers, but no steel coming in the door, I can't whip the employees into making more hammers. If I have an auto shop, but I hire 10 guys from the night shift at McWindy King, and are they going to be able to fix the cars for me? No, they don't have the training. Which brings us to training. Training costs time and money, and it's a hindrance to productivity. But it's an investment in future productivity. Employers would rather poach a skilled employee from another company than train someone from the ground up because they fear having their trainees poached. There's also a significant number of trainees that fail. They fail out of training, and that's a cost. Sure, these are the risks. But if you treat your employees right, the risk evaporates. Poaching only works if you don't have to compete to keep your people. When it comes to training, there are right ways and wrong ways to train people. When I was a young technician, it was pretty common for a trainer to say, "Watch me perform this task and then you'll know how to do it." They'd do the job once with you watching, and from then on, you were expected to perform the work. If you were unsure about the task and had to ask questions, you got a grumpy, "I already showed you what to do. Weren't you watching?" It wasn't training. It was a minimal effort way for trainers to claim they had done their job. Real training requires patience and repetition. Two things people innately hate. Leaders learn to accept it. You also have to continually assess your trainee. Another important lesson we learned in NCO Academy was from a little book, The 5-Minute Manager, popular book back in the 80s. Honestly, the entire book can be described in a single chart. It's simply a way of assessing your workers' skill and enthusiasm and planning accordingly. When an employee is new to the job, they're excited. Their confidence is high, but their competence is low. They're unskilled and they don't know anything about the job. You have to watch them like a hawk because they'll screw stuff up, but you have to do so in a way that doesn't shatter their enthusiasm. Once they start figuring things out, their confidence level drops. They realize they're in for more than they bargained for. They still don't know what they're doing. You have to supervise them on tasks that challenge them, but you also need to give them simpler tasks that they already know well and let them complete those tasks with a little more freedom. You want to work on keeping their confidence. Pretty soon their competence will be pretty solid. They'll move over to here, but they'll still feel lost because although they know the job, it's not automatic yet. They haven't internalized their competence. It's important not to micromanage people in this phase and instead ask their opinion on how they like to accomplish tasks. If they're getting the job done in a way that you wouldn't do, but it meets all the requirements, leave them alone. Once they realize their hands aren't being held, they'll transition to the highest level of confidence and competence. To quote Robert Heinlein, they'll grok the fullness of what they're doing. You won't be training them anymore. You'll be verifying their work and giving them trainees to manage. The part I haven't talked yet about is discipline. As a leader, you have the responsibility to foster discipline. If the rules aren't being followed, you're the culprit. Rules and performance goals need to be realistic, defined, and communicated to workers. If the rules aren't realistic, defined, or communicated, it's a failure of leadership, not of the employee. If you discipline a worker for not following rules or not meeting performance goals that aren't realistic, defined, or communicated, you're opening yourself to a lawsuit, and you deserve it. However, if the responsibilities are satisfied and a worker isn't meeting the standard, you need to acknowledge it and take appropriate action. A leader needs to be strict on the rules and not let things slide. You especially cannot engage in favoritism. If your best worker breaks the rules, you need to take them aside, show them appreciation for the work they are accomplishing correctly, and then tell them where you need them to improve. Several years ago, my son was upset. I asked him what was up. He said, "My boss hates me." One minute he was on the phone to the corporate office telling them how good I was, and then a few minutes later he was writing me up for being late that day. Were you late that day? Yeah, but why was he telling the corporate office I'm so good if he's writing me up? As a leader, you have to write up employees whenever they do something wrong, even if you're their best employee. I absolutely love the people I'm working with. They're great, but whenever they screw something up, I have to write them up. It doesn't mean I hate them, but what if it's the first time in a string of screw-ups? What if they're starting to train wreck? If I don't do anything, they think nobody cares. If I write them up, they know I care that they do things right. It helps me keep my workers from getting bad. Did your boss sit down and ask you why you were late and work it out with you to prevent it from happening again? Yeah. Then you know he likes you. If he calls you in and says, "You were late, sign this write-up," and then tells you to leave, that's when you know he hates you. Or he's just lazy. So the truth of the story is that you can absolutely not tolerate dead weight. Dead weight employees suck up pay that could be used for productive people. Dead weight employees mean that someone else is having to perform their work for them. Dead weight employees destroy the productivity of hard workers. Would you work harder if you saw your coworker slack off and still get a paycheck? There are some people who want recognition and will work harder, but a good friend of mine got a promotion in his company because his boss wasn't completing his nightly reports. My friend started making sure that the reports got done. Management noticed the reports were being completed and without the massive grammatical errors. My friend quickly got promoted above his boss. In a few years, he was in senior leadership and ended up working for that company for over 20 years. But what if your company's not as competent? What if leadership wasn't doing anything about deadweight employees? What if you had no serious prospects for promotion? Would you still work as hard? Deadweight is contagious. I did the paperwork to get someone booted out in the military. He was dead weight, and I didn't have enough people as it was. As soon as he was gone, the recruiter sent another troop to school, and we gained an excellent worker. You won't have the opportunity to get good workers if you're hanging on to a dead weight employee who's holding up that position. One of my mentors got promoted to a position because he had a reputation as a hard ass. It's not that he was mean. In fact, he was very personable, but he had no problem performing the documentation to get a civil service employee fired. He laid waste to an unproductive shop, and the workers who weren't deadweight got the message. In less than a year, he turned the shop around and got promoted again. Of utmost importance is that you praise your workers in public, but punish them in private. Never badmouth them. If you have someone who's a problem child, never trash talk them in front of their peers. This will never result in them wanting to work harder for you, but will rather tell them that you don't respect them. Their failures are your private business with them. When they succeed, make sure everyone knows. Hearing from someone else that they're doing good work is a head rush that will keep them coming back for more. This should also put foremost in your mind that you should never punish a group for one person's actions. Shaming a worker in front of their peer group never works well. It only makes them bitter, especially if they're getting grief from their peers. When you first get a new worker, sit down with them and talk with them about your expectations. Make sure they know where to find the rules and the performance goals. Ask them for their aspirations. Check back with them every 6 months. Document what you discuss with them each time. If you have to counsel them in between, bring them into your office, sit down, and be conversational. It should never be personal, but it should be conducted extremely professionally. It should not be an ass chewing unless the infraction was egregious. Egregious is not hurting your pride or costing $1,000. Egregious is seriously risking someone's health or costing an amount of money that threatens the viability of the business. When it comes to counseling itself, have the worker close the door and sit down across from you. I strongly recommend having another neutral leader in the room as a witness, and let the employee know that the leader is there as a witness. In the Air Force, we practice the shit sandwich. You tell the employee something that you appreciate about their work. Talk both them and the organization up and the goals you're working towards. That's the bottom layer of bread. Then talk about what they did wrong. This is the shit in the sandwich. Show them the rules and then where they violated those rules. Talk about how it hurt your organization's goals. You're not trying to guilt trip them, but they need to understand their place in the organization. If it's appropriate, ask them what they're going to do to make amends for those goals, for their failures. Ask them what they're going to do to keep it from happening again. You'll need to do your homework beforehand because often they'll sit there and kind of shrug and not want to answer. They'll want to mumble. Give them ideas of what they can do. If your employee was late because his alarm clock didn't go off, suggest you use 2 alarm clocks, one battery powered, one outlet powered. When you have commitments from the employee, Document everything you talked about. Remind them that you appreciate them and you want them to succeed. Let them know they can reach out to you if they feel they're struggling. This is the top layer of bread on the shit sandwich. It sounds terrible, but it works. And even when you're familiar with the concept of the shit sandwich, you welcome it because it's not an outright ass chewing. For an egregious failure, you need another leader and not one of their peers in the room for your security and as a witness to the proceedings. When my commander did the final paperwork to push my airmen out of the military, he had 3 of us senior NCOs in the room with him for the counseling session. This is for serious matters only. You sit, but they don't sit. They stand and they keep their mouth shut. Let them know they get time to rebut, but they need to keep their mouth shut until that time. Let them know their job is at stake. It might be an ass chewing, but you need to keep your composure. Keep your butt in the chair. Don't shout. Don't curse. Don't verbally abuse them. Don't speculate. Don't lie. State the facts and the failure. When they rebut, be open to hearing information that clears their name. You might have been told a lie by someone else. Make a clear-headed decision. If you need a recess before you make a decision, take it. If they refuse to keep their mouth shut, give them one chance. Escort them out the door, tell them to cool down, and bring them back in 10 minutes. If they still act out, fire them and have them escorted off the premises. When on deployment in support of Iraq and Afghanistan, I had an absolutely phenomenal mechanic who had been involved in an incident on the flight line before I got there. He had done as he was told and delivered a piece of equipment to an aircraft. The crew chief working on that aircraft then made a mistake that damaged the aircraft. The crew chief blamed the mechanic, and his squadron's chief backed the crew chief up with a lie. My troop was not allowed to rebut the accusation. The commander punished my mechanic with a letter of reprimand, which would stick with him for a couple of years and affect his career. A couple of weeks later, the chief approached my mechanic and apologized, saying that, well, the crew chief had turned out to be a dirtbag. However, the damage to the airman's career was done. His enlistment was up soon after he returned home, and he left the Air Force. The Air Force lost a good troop over a lie given during a poorly conducted counseling session. I've seen good leaders and I've seen bad bosses, and I hope this helps you build on your leadership skills. If you take nothing else away from this video, please keep these things in mind. Workers need to be paid in full on time. A leader has goals, and he removes obstacles so his employees can achieve more. Praise your workers in public, but punish them in private. Rules and performance goals need to be realistic, defined, and communicated to the employees. Counsel employees when they do something wrong, even if they're your best employee, but focus on it being a growing opportunity and not punishment. Never tolerate dead weight. Always keep in mind that leadership is about caring about your fellow man and not treating them as a disposable asset. So, thank you for your time.